as you can see, my name is Dermot Shean. I'm based in the southeast, which is not the same as London, which sounds a bit of a contradiction. If we were to take the London region and the southeast region together, they would be so big that they would populate or outnumber in terms of size any of the other local regions. The other regions obviously being, apart from England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So you've got effectively 4 regions. But UKTI South East is where I am. I'm based in Surrey, so I look specifically at helping Surrey-based companies. But I also wear a hat for the Middle East. So I take trade missions to the Gulf, for example. I've just recently come back from UAE and Oman. So I effectively wear 2 hats. I've also lived in places like Brazil for about 4.5 years. And so I know a number of other countries as well. Who are we? It's rather a funny sort of looking like bunch of people dancing around the globe. We're partly funded by the Foreign Office and partly funded by what used to be called the DTI, and Alan and I were commiserating just before we all met, chucking a perfectly good brand like DTI out of the window, and we now call ourselves BIS, Business Innovation and Skills, which a lot of people don't yet appreciate. We have effectively 2 functions. One is the trade side, which is helping companies to export. At the moment, about 25,000 SMEs are currently exporting, and we want to pump it up to about 50,000. So that is the main activity. The government, as you know, is completely preoccupied by the financial situation, economic situation, and one of the main thrusts of the strategy of the government at the moment is exporting, international trade. I mean, Germany, for example, over twice as much exporting as we do. They have just recently, their unemployment rates are now the lowest for 20 years. So that's the sort of model we ought to be really looking at. So there's a lot of support within the government towards what we do. We do have a flagship product. As I say, I don't want to be sort of too boring and give you a lot of sort of tedious menus, but it's called Passport to Export, which has been going for about 10 years. It's for companies who are just starting. Some of you may be in this very situation, just starting to dip your toe into international trade, exporting in a more proactive way. So we would do, as an international trade advisor, sort of a bit of a health check about your company, your services or your products, how well you've done in UK, are they exportable sort of products, and if you don't have export turnover of more than about 20-25%, you could qualify. And obviously you've got to have exportable products or services, which in many cases would be okay. Occasionally there are products which clearly are not suitable, or for cultural reasons, or social reasons, they just wouldn't be exportable, like pork pies to the Gulf region, unless you happen to be an expat. So we would then create a sort of action plan with sort of smart-based targets to tie in the passport scheme with their export goals. A goal might be typically, we want to export for the first time and we want to concentrate on 2 new markets, or we want to increase our export turnover from £1 million to £5 million over the next 12-15 months, something like that. Some tangible sort of smart-based goal. It also includes £1,000 worth of funding. It could be, for example, travel, or it could be translation costs, legal costs. £1,000 doesn't go very far, but at least it's better than kicking the backside from George Osborne. It's match funding, so basically you would have to submit £2,000 worth of receipts, export receipts, and we will give you back £1,000. So that's quite helpful. And in addition to that, you get somebody like myself, almost like a sort of surrogate member of your board or your group of managers. We're not wanting to interfere or obstruct, we're there just sort of to help brainstorm and sort of facilitate the actual implementation of some form of export strategy. It's actually quite helpful.
Can I just ask?
Yeah, of course.
As I'm chairman, I'm allowed to.
Yeah, of course.
Could you describe general expertise as a product?
If it's marketable, I mean, it might be law, it might be...
It wouldn't need to be a syndicated survey, for example.
No, but if it's some form of exportable expertise,
yeah, okay. Thank you.
That would be perfectly okay. It would really come under the service category rather than the product category.
Because that probably covers everyone in this room.
Yes,
that's the reason for asking.
Exactly.
It's quite important.
I mean, Surrey, for example, 70% of the companies in Surrey are service-based, as opposed to 30%, which are nuts and bolts manufacturing, like McLaren Automotive, people like that. This is another thing which will be of particular interest for yourselves. It's the main sort of source of information market research. It's done by our commercial officers in about 95 different markets around the world. Individual commercial officers have a sector responsibility. So you'd have, say in Dubai, you'd have an oil and gas guy, you'd have a construction guy, you'd have a banking guy. So, you know, each of those would have a specialism that you could sort of dovetail into. The services, depending on how much research is required, I mean, you're looking on the end of your seats now because you have to cost your research yourselves, I'm sure, is between about £500 and £10,000. You might be doing a sort of nationwide research report for, say, the USA. Well, it's probably more likely to be £10,000 in terms of the sheer effort required covering that. Pretty good value for money on the whole, and on the whole very popular. My target, for example, this year up to April, March, at the end of this month, was about £25,000 worth of this type of report, and I think I've more or less reached that. The sheer demand for objective international research on a timely basis. I worked for Reuters for about 18 years, which I think was in the blurb, and like yourselves, I appreciate so much the value of timely, accurate, objective market research. Yes, of course.
Who does that kind of work?
It'll be locally employed people, but it will also include some people who have come from, say, London, who are working in the commercial section in, say, Paris or Moscow or Sydney. And so it's a mixture of people. If you've got, certainly in certain countries, the local people would have the cultural edge in terms of speaking Arabic, whereas somebody just coming in, from, say, London wouldn't necessarily have that language skill, but otherwise it would be a mixture, mostly local people.
Embassy staff or UKTI employees?
Yes, either locally employed or coming in from some other country. So you can see the sort of things. Again, I'm sure a lot of this stuff is familiar to you. The other thing which I would do, for example, I've helped people, for example, have a reception at the embassy, launching a whole new product or a new brand, and the embassy will arrange all the invitations for you, and it's incredibly good value for money. So you can have a high-profile venue, say the ambassador's residence or an embassy. I've done one in Madrid for golf accessories companies, and the whole reception, simultaneous translation, they had canapes and kava, and they paid, the whole thing was paid for several times, just in the orders they got from that one event. So it's quite good. And then, obviously, we also have the commercial officers coming over from, say, Algeria or from China or from US, and they come over to UK, and you can pick their brain for half an hour or something like that, free of charge. So that can be quite valuable, rather than you have to schlep all the way to Riyadh or all the way to Muscat to talk to a commercial officer. If they happen to be over here, you can grab them. So that can be quite useful. This is the Export Market Research Scheme, which is, I'm going to, actually until now we've used the Chambers of Commerce, British Chambers of Commerce. So I'm actually going to, because I think this is really important, so I've actually written down some extra stuff for you. If the company wants to do the research in-house, they get 50% off, a 50% rebate for that, up to £5,000. So that could be quite generous. If the company wanted to commission an outside researcher, they get 50% off a max of £10,000. So that could be helpful. If it's, say, a very juicy Frost & Sullivan report that just came out last week on, say, the automotive sector, and off the shelf it's going to cost, say £10,000, again, we can contribute 33% up to a maximum of 5,000. So those are quite useful sort of extra grants in terms of research that we can offer you. I'm reading them out because until now we've had the British Chambers of Commerce handling this particular project, but they're now under our umbrella, so it makes it easier. Does that sound quite sort of clear to you? Or so it's quite good. I mean, it's quite generous, and we do try and encourage companies in that sense to do research, and we can pay for that. There's a thing called Export Communication Review, which is basically a complete audit from the time somebody picks up the phone, how do they cope with a client that doesn't speak very good English, etc., etc., and the look and feel of your website. So it's really quite important as a sort of review and audit, and it costs effectively a subsidy of about £250 for that. So it doesn't actually cost very much money when you think that it's a total of £500, of which we pay £250. So that could be quite nice if you're starting off. You really want to internationalize, globalize the look and feel of your brand, of your company. I, for example, have my business cards. They've got Arabic on one side, English on the other. Little basic stuff like that, which just makes a difference in terms of selling your product or service. There are also trade grants for trade shows, and they can be anything from about £1,000 to £1,800, and that can be really helpful for a company that's going off to exhibit for the first time. So don't miss a trick with that. The only criterion, or the only condition on that, is that the exhibition has to be outside the country, which is a bit of a nuisance because you can sometimes go to NEC or Olympia and there are more foreign visitors coming to your stand in UK, paradoxically, than there are if you were in Paris or Frankfurt or Canton. But having said that, that's just the only sort of condition we have. Market visits, I just said, come back from Oman and UAE, and the clients, okay, cost quite a lot of money, £3,000 or £4,000, hotels, flights and stuff, but they got about £650 from us for that. So it just helped sort of get them out there. One of the things we're trying to do is encourage people to just get out to the market. It's so easy to sit on your backside and expect the orders to come in or your business to come in. And particularly in the Middle East, I'm sure you all know, they buy you as the person. They're not buying your service or your product or your research. So you can go out there frequently, and that costs quite a lot of money before you even get any business from that. So we try and support as much as we can. So and it could be an in-market reception. I always try and arrange it so that it coincides with breakfasts with the local business people, the British business groups, for example, in these local countries, which are great networking opportunities. They often have a reception at the embassy, so they can have more networking. So I always try and add value to the visit. And as I say, there will be doing business briefings on particular countries, which is quite helpful. So you might not know very much about, say, Southeast Asia, and we'll have a whole day on the different countries with the commercial officers flying in to give you a briefing on those countries. So that could be quite helpful. There are masterclasses. They're basically workshops. It sounds a bit grand calling it masterclass, but they're really helpful. And they cost, if you're on one of the schemes, about £50 a day, which is nothing. But they're really, really helpful. There's one called Winning and Delivering Business Overseas. It's a 2-day course. It's free of charge for people on the Passport to Export scheme. 2 days in a holiday inn, and all you pay for is your Bollinger. Apart from that, and it really is the A to Z of best practice international trade. At the end of it, you have an export action plan. So that can be really, really quite helpful. At the moment, for example, we're using CAS Business School for another of our schemes. 6 courses, incredibly good, each of them worth about £250. 1-day courses, and they're free of charge for one particular scheme. International marketing, commercial ethics, and sort of best practice and governance, IPR protection. So very, really useful, punchy, relevant courses that we can do for you. The International Trade Network. I mentioned briefly people like myself. I've worked for Reuters for about 18 years. I was in the army. I taught English as a foreign language. I've been a commodity broker. I worked for an SME in educational software for 8 years. But we also have a Turkish person who looks after Turkey. We've got a Finnish person. So we've got a number of other nationalities and specialists. And we also have sector specialists in about 11 different sectors, ranging from aerospace, food and drink, security and defense, education and skills, construction. So we've got those as well who can help. So they dovetail in a sense with the commercial officers. So that's quite helpful. And of course, Business Link. Unfortunately now they've sort of migrated to being a sort of call center. But we used to, relate to that quite a lot. Probably all of you heard of Business Link. So a lot of, in Southeast region, we've got about 13 national trade advisors, 10 of which are the sector advisors. So a huge amount of know-how and experience amongst us. And what can happen is that I will come back, somebody's asked me a very difficult technical question on patenting or patent law, and I will go back to my PC, send a quick email to everybody without mentioning the name of the company, and within 10-15 minutes I've got some fantastic stuff back from my colleagues. So we've got this huge pool of talent that we can offer in terms of help. This is our sort of Southeast region website, which gives a list of all the, for example, the different events and training and things like that. So that's quite useful to sort of have an eye on. This is another example of it, the sort of list of courses and things like that we've got. Market visit to UAE and Oman, that was my visit example, trade mission. So that's quite a useful website, that's the local website. Export Talk, we don't actually use an awful lot, I have to confess. It's sort of basically sort of forum type thing that anyone who's got a query, any of our clients got a query, they can sort of email us, and then the relevant international trade advisor will then respond. So we're trying to encourage that sort of dialogue with people, but it's not that easy. This is probably one of the most important websites. I really would recommend you take note of that, because it's not just country information, but it's also sector information. A lot of stuff, say oil and gas, or food and drink, or security. So you can look up a lot of information about Australia, but you can also equally look up a lot of information about the aerospace industry. So that really is quite important. That's UKTI.gov for government.uk. It's quite an important website. I recommend that to anybody, and I look at it constantly myself. This is an example. Happens to be Brazil, but behind that you've got lots of other reports. You might well have some sector reports as well, of a generic nature. That's an example of creative and media, one of the sectors we talked about. So you can access on a country basis or on a sector basis. This is just a sort of summary of what we can do. Overseas market introduction, so it's the market research done by the MC people. The more chunky research that I mentioned in terms of subsidies we can get. The export communications review, the look and feel of your company. The exhibition grants, the grants for trade missions, and then obviously the training and workshops, and then the website resources. But what I wanted to show you a couple of case studies, because I think, to be honest, we can really bore you on a late Thursday afternoon, evening, just trotting out a whole list of what we can do. It's much more relevant. These are the companies that I work for. If you like, before the passport export scheme and then after. The strategy really was to diversify this company from just single sectors to a wider group of sectors, and single markets to a wider group of markets. We've got companies, if you look at the defence one here, they have virtually all their business with the MOD, so that's one country and one client. And the MOD could have woken up one morning, given them a moratorium, and even though they had £9 million worth of business, they would have been up the creek without a paddle. So my job for the year or two that I was involved with them was to sort of get them onto other contracts with NATO, a big US tender that they won, and generally try and move them away from just the MOD into things like emergency services, to diversify into complementary sectors, rather than just being stuck in with the MOD. And equally, this company here, very good people, and he sold it. The MD sold the company for I think something like £5 million after about 2.5, 3 years, very successfully. So there's a couple of examples of how we have helped these companies to succeed. After the passport export scheme, obviously we'd review the progress that they'd made over that 18-month, 18-month period. I mentioned Gateway to Global Growth, which is complementary to the passport export scheme. It's more for more experienced exporters. And as I say, they're the ones who get this CAS business classes, which are amazing, these 6 CAS business school classes. So that is Gateway to Global Growth. There's no other money involved. We don't give them other grants, but they do at least get those 6 amazing workshops. And then obviously the ongoing support of us guys. I mean, even when they finish the scheme, I can get called, 3 or 4 years later and say, Dermot, can you help with this? So we continue a relationship. Rather like you, I'm sure, you don't want just a once-off relationship. You want to continue developing that relationship and continuing that relationship. Even when you may have finished the contract for that particular job, you still want to keep in with that, the door open with that client, and we want to do the same in that sense. And then obviously sort of getting them involved with everything that they need to be involved with, relevant for themselves. So that I think is pretty well the conclusion. Where do we go from now? That's really when you're talking to some clients, but it's to do with the workbook that they get when they're on this 2-day course at the university. They will then liaise, they have their own international trade advisor, like somebody like myself, designated, and then that's our helpline, and then the main website, and then that local website, and then Business Link, which unfortunately isn't quite as active as it used to be. So I think that's about it. I'm sorry I've rushed through, and I hope it wasn't too quick and stuff. But I think Caroline's got much more to offer now. So hand you over.